I'd like to introduce to you Woody Woolston, who is my treasured assistant and collaborator. And this is a cake that's from my new book, Rose's Heavenly Cakes, that is made in the Nordic Ware tube pan, which I think is the most elegant pan. And I love baking in tube pans because they have a center tube, so it bakes very evenly. But any tube pan that you use that has a fluted edge, it's really important to use a spray with both grease and flour. And either do it over the sink or do it over a pan, because otherwise it gets very messy. This is actually an early American recipe that a chef gave to me and said, can you fix it? Because it was uneven, it wasn't in a tube pan. And so after much tweaking, it is now one of my favorite pans, one of my favorite cakes. And
it's fitting that we're doing it in a heritage pan, too.
Oh, I didn't think of that. Thank you. See what I mean? Collaborator. Anyway, we start with the heavy cream, so that's in the fridge because that needs to be cold. But you know when you whip cream, I always say, and authors say, to be sure, please pour, to be sure and start with a cold bowl and beater. Not in this case, because if it were too cold, it would be too stiff to incorporate the eggs. And the magic of this cake, the whipped cream cake, is that it doesn't have any butter. But there is butter in it from the cream. And in fact, there's more butter in the cream than if you were to add butter to the cake. We start always by whipping with whisk beater when you're whipping cream on low speed, and then we gradually raise so it doesn't splash all over you. You raise the beater to high and whip medium in this high. Case. Well, actually, medium high would be a little bit too high. Medium high, which on the KitchenAid is 8. And we're going to whip it until stiff peaks form. At that point, we add the eggs. When stiff peaks form, we can start adding the whole eggs. These are 3 whole eggs, lightly beaten with vanilla, teaspoon of vanilla. And you always add it gradually so that it emulsifies, which means that it mixes in evenly. This is the easiest cake imaginable.
I'll take that.
It's very light because of the whipped cream and the air, and it's very, very delicious. And this is the sugar. I like to use super fine, but it's fine to use fine granulated. It takes about 30 seconds to slowly get it to be beaten in. That gives it the airiest possible texture. And what we have waiting here is the flour. This is cake flour mixed with baking powder and salt. And what I do is I whisk it to mix it evenly, and then I sift it to make sure that it's light and will integrate easily into the whipped cream mixture. And that's it. That's all the beating that we're going to need.
And we're done.
Yeah, and we're not quite done because
we're done with this part of it.
Yeah, we have to add it in 2 batches, and I'm just going to get it from the side of the bowl and the bottom where it never quite mixes in as well. Thank you.
And we'll get rid of that.
For this, I use a silicone spatula, and here we have about half. Is that okay?
Yeah, it's okay.
With you?
That's okay with me.
Okay. And you don't have to wait until all of the flour disappears because you have a second chance at it when you add the second batch. Just most of it so it doesn't sit too heavily. But when you fold the rest of it in, you want to make sure you reach to the bottom and the sides. Otherwise, there'll be pockets of flour that aren't integrated. Okay, just dump away. I'll help you.
Get it all out.
You could use bleached all-purpose flour, but it's more tender in this case with cake flour. I prefer to use it. And I'm going to show you a trick of putting in the batter into these fluted tube pans. This one is easier than some, but some of them that have really fine flutes, you often get bubbles at the top and it doesn't fill all the depressions. So I always start with just a little bit of the batter and then press it in, and then add the rest of it. And then we usually take a knife and go through it the way you would for an angel food cake or a chiffon so that there are no big air bubbles in it. The great thing about the fluted tube pans, the tube pan itself, is that the heat is conducted from the center to the sides. Often it takes longer for the center of a cake to bake and it's never as even, but this one doesn't have a center, so you don't have to worry about that. And also, you don't have to use buttercream because the cake doesn't need it and it has a beautiful decoration.
Now let's check the bottom, just to be sure.
While you're checking the bottom, I'm going to start doing the top.
Okay.
This will be the top of the pan.
Yep, there's a little
And, well, if we see any flour, we can always mush it in at the end.
We're looking good.
We just don't want it to sit with the flour unadded. And you can see the consistency. It's very fluffy. And we just press it in now, well, with a spatula, and now just dump in all the rest.
Here, I'll get mine.
And you want this to bake at 350. It's really important that the temperature be right when you're baking cakes, because if it takes longer, it won't have as good a texture. If it takes less time, it also won't have as good a texture. So if you find that your oven is baking too fast, just turn it down. Or if it's baking too slowly, turn it up maybe 25 degrees. And this should fill the pan no more than 1 inch from the top. These are 10-cup pans, and most fluted tube pans these days are made according to that standard, even if they're not Nordic ware pans. Some ovens bake unevenly, in fact most do. So when you're making this type of a cake, as long as it's not a sponge cake like a genoise or sponge or chiffon or angel, 3/4 of the way through the estimated baking time, you can turn the pan around halfway. And that way it will be evenly brown all over. So that's about it.
Let's see. Now I'm running our knife
He's
through.
a better scraper than I am. He never leaves a smidgen in.
No. Too much goodness here.
Yeah. And now this goes, you don't want it to sit,
No,
you want it to go
knife.
right into the oven.
Run a knife blade through it. Which,
Well, if we don't have a knife blade, we can always use the back,
we use that.
Yeah, and that's it.
In we go.
And it will level off in the oven. People always wonder how you can tell when a cake is done. Well, if you want to be absolutely sure, an instant read thermometer would read 190 degrees. But all you have to really do is to press it lightly, and if it springs back or a wooden toothpick put between the center and the sides comes out clean, then you're in good shape. Then you can take it out and let it sit on a rack for 10 minutes before unmolding it. Again, I like to use the serrated knife because it doesn't compress the cake. And you'll see that all these different fluted cake pans, tube pans, they're more interesting when you cut the cake than when you actually see it in the whole cake, because it has that marvelous little shape. And see how soft and velvety the texture is, yet very light.
Look at that.
Any good? Let me
Very
see. Thank you.
Now, most people don't know this, but you do have a tie to the local area, don't you?
I have more than one.
And what
My
would that be?
parents met at Lake George.
Oh,
I was born a year later. And now my father, who's 96, lives in Grafton, New York.
He
On his
does?
own, yeah.
oh my goodness.
So I just love coming here to visit my friends and my family.
That is fabulous. And now I know that Heavenly Cakes won Book of the Year award.
Yes, from the International Association of Culinary Professionals. I was really thrilled about that.
And also, it's got another distinctive award.
Yes, it was Amazon's first book ever to be on Kindle for the iPad, the iPhone, the iPhone too, in an interactive version. So that means that when there's a special technique, people can click on it and they see and hear me actually showing and doing the technique. And I think this will be the way of the future for books when they can afford to do it, for any how-to books. But it's baking books that really require it.
So yours is the first cookbook to be offered
Yes,
this way.
exactly.
So then people, if they feel the need for that particular method, they can review it. If they don't, they can just go on.
Oh, sure, exactly.
Now, what was that process like? That must have been very time-consuming.
Not for me, because I'd already done the DVD, which was consuming.
okay.
But my sponsor, General Mills Gold Medal Flour, actually did that for me to go with the book, and then we put it up on YouTube. And when Amazon saw it, they thought, perfect, it will be the cutting-edge thing for the first cookbook on
And
Kindle.
remind us again of your blog address.
realbakingwithrose.com.
Okay.
And there are over 140, maybe 150 YouTube segments of my
Really?
techniques. Yeah, for everything I've ever done, just about.
That is phenomenal. Now, on the blog, people can buy certain products?
Yes, in fact, one of my favorite products that I've designed for baking is for pie baking, because people seem to have a lot of trouble, or they're intimidated by crimping the edges. You know,
Right.
when you get used to doing it, you can do it. But if you can't, what I do is I designed a pie plate that has deeply fluted edges. So all you have to do is press the dough into them, and then you get this stunning border. Plus, it's ceramic, so it bakes beautifully even and crisp bottom crust.
I have a quick question. When you are going to put foil around a pie so the crust doesn't brown too quickly at the edges, do you do that when you start or
Sally,
toward the
that
end?
is such a great question, because in my Pine Pastry Bible, I say after the first 15 minutes when it starts browning. It's
Good.
too late. No, you do it right from the beginning because
you
it will
do?
continue to brown. It browns under the foil.
Oh, it does? Oh, see, I was doing it the wrong way. I was putting it on
well,
toward
so
the
have I
end.
been most of my life.
Well, thank
I'm
you
so
so
glad
much
you
for
asked so we
coming.
can tell everybody.
Thanks so much for coming in today.
Thank
It was
you
a
for
pleasure.
inviting me.
And I didn't even get a chance to try the cake, which I will do now.